Hey everyone, my name is Dana Windsor and I am a security consultant with Bastion Security based out of Wellington. And what I'm going to be talking to you guys today about is my post-grad final research, which was titled Hijacking Human Emotion, the Exploitation of Others Through Technological Scamming. And so just a little bit of a context as to kind of why I chose this topic in the first place, and also kind of why I'm in this industry in the first place as well. So growing up, I was the kind of person who thought they were always safe online. It didn't even occur to me that what I was putting online could be at a disadvantage to me. Also, I didn't care for technology. Dad had always worked in technology and said it was a good industry to get into. It's great. I couldn't care less for it. My background at uni is in criminology, specifically intimate partner violence and sexual violence as well. But when it came time to choosing a topic for my final research, I wanted to try and do something a little bit different. And one of the things that I'd realized was that throughout my studying career, I'd subconsciously used technology in almost all of my papers. So I'd written about how a particular piece of technology had been used to commit a crime. So think cyberstalking, technology facilitated sexual violence, that kind of thing. And also around the same time, it was around COVID, and so there was an increase in people moving online. Along with that, there was also an increase in warnings for scams from people using social media. Hey, don't engage with this person trying to sell you tickets. They're not going to send you the tickets, or even banks saying, hey, don't click on these links. For those warnings to come out, they would have had to have occurred at some point. You know, the little warnings on the caution I'm hot on paper cups, those things would have had to have occurred. And so I wanted to understand how scams, again, were occurring and how so many people were falling victim to them in the first place. So asking around friends and family, no one seemed to really have a grasp on how they could occur. And even then, only one person at the university could supervise me because they'd written a chapter on advanced fee fraud. So that kind of solidified my choice in choosing this as a topic because I wanted to learn more about it. So my research focused on the exploration of the simple techniques and methods that scammers use, and also the technological characteristics that they take advantage of to effectively and successfully scam another person online. I've also briefly touched on some of the negative impacts of scams, because it's not just people losing money or handing over personal information. It's so much more than that. And so I've framed this talk in kind of a similar way, and I'll introduce the 3 scams that I focused on shortly up. But I do want to emphasize 2 points before I get started. The first one is that I hope one of the things that you take away from this is that you don't need to be a tech whiz to scam someone online. You know, you don't have to hack into anything, you don't need to compromise systems or networks or whatever. You know, some of the methods and techniques that I'll be talking about are things that we use in our jobs. You know, the technological characteristics we take advantage of in our everyday lives as well. And I like to think we're not bad people, or at least most of us. The second point is that a lot of what I'll talk about is the human factor. You know, a scam is only successful if someone falls for it, but that it's not to say that someone is stupid for falling for a scam. That's the kind of mentality that I want everyone to start moving away from. Nowadays, scams are becoming so increasingly sophisticated, and some are even specifically targeting individuals and groups. And so all it takes is just one person to be taken, to be caught off guard, or just to be a little bit naive around the topic to fall for one. And I like to think there's a big difference between naivety and stupidity. So the 3 scams that I chose to look into was advanced fee fraud, romance scams, and phishing attacks. And so these 3 I chose specifically because they demonstrate the evolution of using technology in crime and how they're used to not only facilitate traditionally offline crime, but also it generates the ability to commit purely online crime of a similar nature. So the first one, which is probably one of the most well-known types of fraud, is advanced fee fraud. And it became quite prevalent in the 1980s with what was called the Nigerian 419, so the 419 refers to the Nigerian criminal code that dealt with fraud. And this was where a Nigerian prince will contact you and ask for you to help send them money so that you can help release their funds. on the premise that you would be given a reward at a later date. So you're setting a fee in advance. So that money they'll ask you for will be used to buy materials to help to clean tracking chemicals off of physical money or pay for stamping duty fees, those kind of things. And they'll keep asking for more money at each step until you either stop sending the money or they move on to the next person. So this scam in particular helps show that scams that even date back to the 16th century are evolving into the technological sphere and moving online. The next one, which is kind of a subcategory of advanced fee fraud, and this is romance scams. So this is where a scammer will engage in a seemingly real romantic relationship with someone before requesting money or personal information or other things. So just to get a kind of an idea of how many people could be targeted specifically for this crime, in 2016, there were over 240 million registered users on over 8,000 online dating sites and apps. 6 years later, that number increased to 366 million. And then even just 1 year later, there was another 15 million registered users increase. And even then, by 2028, the estimated numbers are supposed to reach to 452 million people. So that's a lot of people. And this third one, which I'm sure most of you have probably heard about at some point, phishing attacks. So this is where emails are sent and made to look like they're coming from a legitimate person or company, and they'll usually ask the receiver to click on a link and enter your personal details. And so usually the personal details that they collect from that will be used to commit subsequent crimes as well. So major examples include ID in your banks around tax return times, study link universities around the beginning of the school year, or online retailers when there's competitions around. So for scams to occur, a scammer will use sales techniques, and they'll also play off our fantasies and how people have been conditioned and how they're expected to respond in social situations. They'll also take advantage of technological characteristics that facilitate scams online, so that includes the reach of the internet, anonymity, the availability of technology, and also the ease of use, especially with the new generations. And then I also included a concept which is primarily used to help explain addictive gambling, but it can also be used to help try and explain victimization in scams and also potentially re-victimization as well. So for sales techniques, there are quite a few of them that scammers will use, but for the purpose of this talk, I've highlighted 3. The first one there is foot in the door, which is where people who have complied with smaller amounts are more likely to fulfill subsequent requests, even if they increase in denomination. Second one is door in the face, which is where someone who's been asked for $100 will balk at that idea, say no, but then if they say, hey, maybe only $20, you're more likely to give in to that and fulfill that request. $20 compared to $100, that's a saving in a lot of people's minds. And the third one, and probably the most important, is urgency. This is where scammers will give their intended target a limited time offer. So think, hey, you've won $10 million, but you've got 2-3 hours to respond before we move on to the next person. Or, hey, someone's trying to compromise your account, click on this link and enter your password and change it. That urgency is going to propel someone into acting irrationally without properly thinking about what's actually happening. So not only will they use sales techniques, but they'll also play off, again, how people have been conditioned to respond in certain situations and also the fantasies that we have. So those fantasies influence our actions, and movies, for example, presents the perfect romantic scenario. People especially start to idolize those situations, and so when it happens, we kind of become almost blind to what is actually happening. Whereas, on the other hand, if I asked you what would you do if you won lotto? You would either already know what you're going to do with that money, or it wouldn't take very long to think of what you would spend your millions of dollars on. Especially when we're presented with that making money quick, we're very quick to respond to that because who doesn't like free money? And lastly, and this is probably one of the big important things as well, is that they'll play off our natural desire to implicitly trust others. So when the internet first came out, everyone believed that what was on the internet was true, was real, helped develop found footage genre, all of those kind of things. And Jason Hong, who was an academic who wrote a paper on the state of phishing attacks in 2012, identified that phishing attacks were particularly successful if they came from existing contacts of that targeted individual. So someone who they've already communicated with and therefore trust implicitly. So again, banks, universities, online retailers, that kind of thing. So moving on to this concept, so again, the near-win gamble, this can be used to help explain victimization for some types of scams, particularly romance scams, and also the re-victimization as well. So this is where if an individual believes that the actions that they are doing and is leading them very close to getting what they want, they will continue to exhibit that same behavior on the off chance that they will succeed the next time. So for an example, for romance scams, if you've invested all this time, you've invested emotional capacity, all of that, and you want to meet that person, if they turn around and say, hey, I don't have enough money to come visit you, can't buy a plane ticket, can you send me the money? You will think, oh, if I send you the money, you want to come meet me. I get to meet you for the first time. I love you, that kind of thing. You'll send them the money. And then on the day that you're supposed to meet them, something will happen. Their dad gets into an accident, goes to hospital. They miss their flight. They'll ask for more money to pay for another ticket. Because you're so close to meeting them on that day, you're more likely to send them more money next time in the hopes that you will meet them until either you stop sending them money or they move on to their next target. In terms of the technological characteristics, the world is a lot closer than we were 20 years ago. Everything and almost everyone has moved online, especially after the COVID pandemic where everyone was forced home. So just to get an idea, there are currently 5.52 billion users online, and in that there are 5.22 billion users on social media. So that leads to real-time messaging, instant responses. You're able to communicate with people from halfway across the world at the drop of a hat. And so before technology, scams were either extremely time-consuming or very expensive with little to no guarantee for a reward later. Whereas with technology, you're able to reach a vast majority of people, again, at the drop of a hat. Instead of having to rely on getting a large amount of money from one person, you can get $1 from 1 million people, and that's still the same value than just from one person. And so just to kind of show how easy it is, a study in 2006 on why phishing works demonstrates that at the time, over 90% of participants were fooled by that domain name because it looks like Bank of the West, which is quite a big bank in the States. We would look at that and would take a second look at it, but the average New Zealander probably wouldn't think on it for a second. Scams are not just becoming easier or more cost-effective. Kaspi and Gorski, who conducted a study in 2006, looked into deception and those who use technology to deceive others. And the collective response was that scammers may not necessarily perceive their victims as being actual tangible people. It was considered less threatening to deceive someone online that they may never know and may never see. People are becoming more comfortable, they're becoming bolder online. You've got your keyboard warriors, they're less inhibited and they're less restrained. And this is something that was coined by John Suler, who is a scholar within the psychology of cyberspace, which is called online disinhibition effect. And this is where people are able to distance themselves, not only physically, but mentally as well, from the very real harm that they're causing other people. So when we think about the impacts of scams, a lot of people automatically think a financial loss, maybe a loss of technological control. They'll think of handing over your passwords, the hassle of having to change all of your passwords. However, there's so much more than this. So that information, that money is used to commit further crimes. There's so many other consequences that can come out of people who are victimized by scams. And so I've just highlighted a few extra consequences that people may not necessarily think about. And one of the things that will be beneficial for people is that realizing that it's not just those two things that people are losing, there's so much more to that, and people would be more inclined to try and protect themselves online when they understand the extent of the consequences. So the first one is people are unlikely to approach authorities because they might have a fear of being charged for a crime themselves, or $1 means nothing when you compare it to the hassle of approaching the authorities and trying to get that back. Next is the emotional harm. So especially in romance scams, people not only will have lost that money, they'll also be experiencing that very real loss of a relationship to themselves, and that's considered a double hit. They'll also feel guilty, they'll lose confidence in themselves for being able to pick someone that they can trust and be in a romantic relationship with. Next is the physical harm. In some cases, victims have been asked to travel and then they're kidnapped, beaten, and then in a 2011 study on email fraud, one was also killed as well. So there's quite a lot of devastating effects, consequences that can come from being victimized by scams. And then probably one of the most biggest ones was identified by Whitty and Buchanan, who did a study in 2016 that looked into the psychological impacts of online romance scams. They found that people either didn't divulge what was happening to them to those around them, because if they did, and the ones that did, they were often ostracized and pushed away from their friends and family. So those two quotes up there are quotes that were taken from friends and family from within that study as well. So, you've wasted all my inheritance, you've spent all my money, or how can you be so stupid to fall for a scam? Out of the 20 people that they studied, only one person got the support from their friends and family. The other 19 were completely cut off from their friends and family. And this is quite devastating because outside support was identified as being extremely beneficial in the recovery of victims, of people who have been victimized by scams. So just get an idea of how prominent phishing attacks and scams are. I've taken these screenshots from CertNZ, and it's just a breakdown of the categories of the cybersecurity incidents from the last few quarters. So phishing attacks and and credential harvesting is the top one up there, so it's quite a sizable amount, and then scams and fraud is right underneath that. So while phishing attacks is decreasing, so if you can't quite see the top one, says at 1,181 reported incidents. That was from September last year. This one down here at the bottom is less than half, with 484 reported incidents between April and June. And so that could be due to the fact that awareness on phishing attacks is increasing, but there's still the highest reported cybersecurity incidents in New Zealand by a landslide. And if people don't understand how they can occur and how they can happen, these numbers will keep being quite high. So some of you may have noticed that I have references and studies in there that are from 2006, 2011, which is quite a while ago compared to, we're almost 2025. But the reason why I did that, and I did that purposefully, I don't want us to get into a position of complacency. It's easy for us in the industry to kind of understand these types of scams and the whys behind it, but I think we also underestimate or overestimate just how much the average New Zealander knows about these topics. 20 years ago, our understanding on phishing attacks alone was relatively in its infancy. We still believed people deserved what they got, that they were stupid for falling for a scam. And while we may understand it better now, there will always be a new type of scam or way of getting the same end result. So take AI and deep fake technologies, for example. The acknowledgement of it this year alone has jumped. Seeing how it can be used, whereas the average person may not necessarily understand it in the same way that we do. For an example, towards the beginning of the year, there was the finance worker overseas who was tricked into paying millions of dollars to scammers who were using deepfake technologies, and they were using that technology to allow the scammers to pose as the company's CFO and other staff members. And so being on that video call with them, that convinced the finance worker to send that money. That's a lot of money. they did that under the impression that they were doing it for their job, that if they didn't do it, they were being told to do it by their manager. And it's quite important that we need to understand that while we may understand those types of crimes and how they are committed and how that technology is used to commit it for phishing attacks, scams overall is one of the few crimes where there is an active taking of information or money. The target or the intended victim has to volunteer that information and money. They do under false pretenses, but they do. And so it's really hard to have this kind of crime around. We're back. I guess the last kind of thing that I want to make clear is that we're back to square one in our knowledge on this, and we need to understand that. We can't think that we know better on this topic because quite frankly we don't, and that's kind of a good example of it. The finance worker originally thought that an email invite for that call was a phishing email, and so he thought nothing of it, but attending that call, still under a little bit of this might be fishy, but I'll see what it is. He thought that he was in a call with quite a few people that he worked with, so that understanding of maybe it's not a phishing attack, maybe it's real, pushed him over into fulfilling that request. Yeah, so any questions, come see me later. And yeah, I really hope you guys take that away from today. And thank you for listening.
Busted.